Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to another video, and welcome to my December wrap up. Today I'm going to be telling you about all the books that I read in December. So before I get started with talking to you about the books I read in December, just to say that I do have a cold and I feel like I'm slightly losing my voice. I thought I was talking absolutely fine until I started to talk to the camera, and now I feel like my voice doesn't sound like normal. So I was hoping to get a lot of videos filmed today. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, I read some great books in December. It was a very classics heavy month. It was also quite a Christmas reading heavy month, so that feels slightly less relevant and festive now that we're into January, but oh well. So I read a bunch of Victorian things this month, one of which was London Labour and the London Poor by Henry Mayhew. While I say I read it in December, I was actually reading this book for a lot of 2024. I think I started it back in January 2024, so I'm very glad that I managed to finish it off in December. There were two books that I was basically reading for the whole of 2024, London Labour and the London Poor by Henry Mayhew and Varney the Vampire by James Malcolm Ryder. Didn't manage to finish off Varney the Vampire. I'm hoping I might manage to finish it off in January or February this year, 2025, but we'll see. But I did manage to finish off London Labour and the London Poor, so that was very exciting. Anyway, that was a big ramble. London Labour and the London Poor is a really interesting work of Victorian non-fiction. So this is a work of journalism written between the 1840s and the 1850s, in which Henry Mayhew basically looks at the lives of people living in poverty in London, and often people working on the streets. So he looks at stall owners and street sellers, crossing sweepers, street performers, mudlarkers, people working in the collection of waste and rubbish. This is a really fascinating book, and I'm very glad that I read it, and I'm sure I will come back to bits of it in the future. It's not an easy read, it's quite dense and quite dry in places, and basically I would say that Henry Mayhew's writing style isn't that exciting. Basically the bits of the book I enjoyed the most were when Henry Mayhew has a kind of first person account from someone who he interviews, and then we get sort of a page or two of this person's life story, and those bits were always fascinating. But the bits in between that, which are just in Henry Mayhew's style, I didn't find as engaging. And so it's one of those books I sort of suppose I found more interesting than enjoyable. There are some really fascinating things in it, and it was also really interesting to read as someone who loves Victorian literature, because you can see when reading this book, for example, how much Charles Dickens was inspired by this. There are several bits where I was like, oh yes, I can definitely tell Charles Dickens read this, which was fun. I feel like this is a book that you will be interested in if you love Victorian history and Victorian literature, but it's probably one for later on in your Victorian literature and history journey than rather right at the start, because it is quite dense. But I am really glad that I finally got to it, because I've been meaning to read it for such a long time. It did take me a lot of 2024, but I'm glad that I finally finished it off. Sticking with the Victorians, I also read a bunch of Charles Dickens's Christmas novellas in December. So this was for the Christmas Dickens read-along that I was hosting, where we were reading Charles Dickens's 5 Christmas novellas in order in the run-up to Christmas. So I read the first 2 of his Christmas novellas in November, A Christmas Carol and The Chimes, and then I read The Cricket on the Hearth, The Battle of Life and The Haunted Man in December. I've done individual videos on all of these discussing at length, so I'll leave those down below and I won't spend too much time on them here. The Cricket on the Hearth is a kind of heartwarming story of this couple. They've been married for about a year when the husband, who's a fair bit older than the wife, starts to think that maybe she doesn't love him in the way that he has thought she does. And we kind of look at the fallout from that, I suppose. The Cricket on the Hearth has some really nice moments, but I have to say that I enjoyed it a lot less on this reread than I have done previously. I think probably because it is a simpler story than some of Dickens's other Christmas novellas, so I sort of feel like I didn't get anything new out of it on this reread. So I would recommend it, but I feel like it's not one I will come back to a lot. The Battle of Life is a very ambitious Christmas novella spanning 9 years. We have 3 scenes sort of several years apart, and we're looking at the fortunes of a family. I really like The Battle of Life. I would say that the central plot and the central characters are not necessarily the most exciting thing ever, but the minor characters in The Battle of Life are amazing. The 2 lawyers, Snitchy and Craggs, and the family servant Clemency are just wonderful. Clemency, I just love her so much. She's one of my absolute favourite Dickens characters. So I do recommend The Battle of Life a lot. And then The Haunted Man is the best of these 3, and the second best of Charles Dickens's Christmas novellas after A Christmas Carol. I think it is fantastic. If the camera has moved, I apologise. I just managed to drop books everywhere. But anyway, The The Haunted Man is the story of a man called Redlaw, who is haunted metaphorically by the grief he feels after his sister's death, and literally by a phantom who says to him, I can erase all your pain of suffering and sorrow if you like. And Redlaw accepts this bargain, and we follow the fallout from it. And it's just fantastic. I love The Haunted Man. I feel like in premise it is genius. Like, it's as genius as A Christmas Carol. Is the execution quite as fantastic as A Christmas Carol? Maybe not, but I do think it's really, really good. I love The Haunted Man so much, and I really, really recommend it. Probably next Christmas, rather than in January, but it is really fantastic, I promise. Talking of Victorian Christmas novellas, I also read The Christmas Hirelings by Mary Elizabeth Braddon in December. This is a delightful, delightful Christmas novella from 1875 about a baronet who's spending Christmas with his friend and his niece, his grown-up niece, and the friend and the niece are saying, it's just not Christmas, is it, without any children in the house? It's just not festive. We just don't enjoy Christmas in the way that children do. And then the friend says to the baronet and the niece, well, why don't we hire some children to come and spend their Christmas at this big country house? The children will have a nice, fun Christmas in this beautiful house, and we'll have a nicer Christmas because there'll be children about. And then these 3 children come to this house and melt the ice of the baronet's heart. And it's just, like, delightful. It's so good. It's so lovely. In terms of Victorian Christmas novellas, The Christmas Hirelings is up there with A Christmas Carol and A Haunted Man. To be honest, I think it's probably better than A Haunted Man. And definitely if you're looking for something like charming and delightful at Christmas, while I love The Haunted Man, I think it's wonderful, I'm not sure that charming is the right word for it, whereas The Christmas Hirelings is so charming. And Moppet, the little girl, who's kind of the main one of the 3 children that we see, I just loved her so much. It's so lovely. You should just still read The Christmas Hirelings, and it's only like 4 hours on audiobook. It is obviously very Christmassy, so save it for December, but was so fantastic. Genuinely one of my favourite classics of the year. What a wonderful book. And then the other Victorian thing I read in December, I had a very Victorian December, was this. This is The Open Door and Other Stories of the Seen and Unseen by Margaret Oliphant, which was really fun to read because I love Margaret Oliphant a lot, but previous to this I had only read her realist work, so it was quite fun to read some of her sort of supernatural, ghostly stories. And overall, I thought this collection was good. There were 2 stories in it that were like 5 stars for me, and then the others were less strong, and there were some that I definitely liked quite a lot less. And the 2 stories in this collection that I loved the most, that I would really recommend reading, they were Earthbound, which is a ghost story set over Christmas, in which a young man is staying with some family friends for the festive season, and he starts to see this young woman walking around the grounds and no one knows who she is. And then my other favourite story was The Library Window, which is about this young woman who's gone to stay with her aunt, and across the street from her aunt's house is this window, or is it a window? No one can really decide whether it's an actual window or whether it's used to be a window, has been bricked up and painted to look like a window. Sometimes it looks like a window, sometimes it looks like it isn't a window, and sometimes our narrator can see things moving through the window, and it was just really good and quite unusual. So yes, I really liked this collection overall. It contains a lot of like very different ghost stories. Like, I think it's quite a fun thing to read for sort of looking at the variety of Victorian ghost stories. And yeah, overall a good read, though like I said, definitely some stories were stronger than others. Then another short story collection, I also read this, A Book for Christmas by Selma Lagerlöf in December. This is translated from the Swedish by Sarah Death, Peter Graves and Linda Schenck. This is a collection of early 20th century short stories, a lot of which are quite festive, some more festive than others, some are sort of more fairy tale-esque, and some are a bit more religious. There was quite a mix of stories in here, and I found them quite hit and miss. So I think my favourites were probably A Book for Christmas, which is sort of almost like a memory from the author about being a little child, and really being excited to get a book for Christmas. I also quite liked The Skull. That one was quite sinister and quite effective. The Rat Trap, that was a more kind of fairy tale one that I liked. I didn't love every story in this. There were definitely a few that kind of didn't quite work for me, but there were some great stories in here, and it's a very beautiful, nice addition. Penguin Classics kindly sent me a review copy of this, and it's very nice to have. And in December I also read The Blue Castle by L.M. Montgomery, which is a Canadian classic from 1926, and this book was so good. I already spoke about this in my favourite classics of the year. The Blue Castle by L.M. Montgomery is fantastic. It tells the story of 29-year-old Valency, who is unhappy and bored and kind of downtrodden in her life. She lives with her mother, who she doesn't really get on with, with. She does everything that her family says. All her family keep teasing her about the fact that she isn't married yet, although she's 29, and she's feeling very dispirited and bored with her life when on her 29th birthday, she goes to the doctor about some heart pain she's been having and is told that she only has 1 year to live. And she thinks, well, if I have 1 year to live, I am going to really live. And so she changes the way she interacts with her family, and she leaves home and gets a job and changes everything about her life in order to bring herself happiness. And it's such a beautiful, joyous book about like celebrating happiness and things that make you happy, both big things and tiny things. And it's just lovely. It's just so lovely and so fun and entertaining and like heartwarming, while also containing like lots of interesting social criticism about the position of women and the limited choices for women at this point in time. And I just loved it. I just thought it was so good. I just recommend The Blue Castle to everyone. What a wonderful, wonderful book that was. And speaking of wonderful books, something else I read in December was Nervous Conditions by Tsitsi Dangarembga. This is a novel from 1988 from a Zimbabwean author, and it's just fantastic. Genuinely just objectively one of the best books I've ever read. So Nervous Conditions is a buildings romance, a coming-of-age story following a young girl, and we're following her efforts to get an education, her complicated relationship with her elder brother, who gets a lot more kind of priority than her in terms of education and opportunities, and also her friendship with her cousin Nyasha, who becomes a kind of more and more important character as the book goes on. I just think Nervous Conditions is incredible, and I kind of don't want to tell you too much about it because I didn't know that much going into it. And part of the cleverness of Nervous Conditions as a novel is that it kind of starts off and you think it's about one thing, and actually as the book goes on, you come to understand all the other things that the book is about. It's about gender and money and class and colonialism and imperialism and the effects of colonialism on the mind, on the psyche, and so much more. The characterization is incredible. The writing is amazing. It is one of those books that is so serious and like profound and powerful, but also has moments of like real humor and joy. The themes were so well drawn and so interesting, and Dangarembga just does a lot of like really clever things with the buildings romance as a form, harking back to sort of 19th century British buildings romance, and then doing something slightly different with the form. And it's just so good. Like, everyone should read Nervous Conditions. If you take one book recommendation from me of all the books I read in 2024, let it be Nervous Conditions. I did read a couple of things from the 21st century in December, not much, but 2 books. So one other thing that I read was The Winter Spirits, Ghostly Tales for Frosty Nights by a variety of authors. This is a short story anthology published by Sphere, and it features short stories from various writers of historical fiction. This was the book for my historical fiction book club over on Patreon, which was really, really fun. We all really enjoyed it, and it was really nice to kind of like talk about each story individually. There are a lot of really, really fantastic short stories in here. My favourite was The Salt Miracles by Natasha Pulley, because of course it was. Natasha Pulley is my favourite author who isn't from the 19th century. But I also really, really loved Ada Lark by Jess Kidd. I very much need to read some of Jess Kidd's novels. I also loved Hosts by Kieran Mulwood Hargrave, Inferno by Laura Shepherd Robinson, A Double Thread by Imogen Hermes Gower, Jenkin by Catriona Ward. Like, there were so many fantastic short stories in here. As with any anthology written by multiple authors, there were a couple of stories I didn't get on with so well, but overall I thought this was a fantastic collection. I would really, really, really recommend it. It was such a great read. And then I also read this. This is The Woman in the Wallpaper by Laura Jones. This is a proof copy, and this book is coming out in February. I was about to say next year, but this year, because it's now 2025. The publishers very kindly sent me a proof. I'll put the final cover up on the screen as well. So this is a really interesting novel set kind of in the lead up to and during the French Revolution. We follow 2 sisters, Sophie and Lara, who after the death of their father end up working at a wallpaper factory. Lara starts to kind of recognize bits of herself and her life in the wallpaper, and meanwhile both her and Sophie kind of get to know Joseph, the son of the owner of the factory, who lives in this big, grand, somewhat gothic house. His mother died many years ago in mysterious circumstances, and we get the sense that maybe there is some kind of mystery in the past of this family. Meanwhile, we're also following another young woman from a much higher class living in Versailles, and all this time we know that we're kind of heading towards the French Revolution. This was such an interesting book. The twists and turns of the plot were very well done, and it was really compelling. Like, it's quite a long book, and I read it in a couple of days over Christmas and just really enjoyed it. I think one of the things I enjoyed most about it was that I knew it was a book about the French Revolution, so I kind of went into it expecting a book about the French Revolution. And it is in some ways about the French Revolution, but it's also kind of like a big house gothic mystery novel, which is something else I really like that I wasn't expecting this to be. And I really enjoyed the kind of combination of those things and the meeting of those things. Yes, the French Revolution is going on, but also all of these other things in these people's lives are going on too. And I thought that was done really, really well. So I'd really recommend this. A really great read, very compelling, as I said. And yes, coming out very soon in February. So those are the books that I read in December 2024. Can't believe it is now 2025 somehow. That feels very strange, but there we go. Do let me know what you read in December 2024. Did you do any festive or wintry reading yourself? Otherwise, that's all for now. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.